$47,000 doesn't make you family. Rebecca said the day Eleanor realized her daughter had never seen the money as love, only as leverage. 6 months earlier, Eleanor Whitmore had stood in her bank wearing the same navy cardigan she always wore when she had to make difficult decisions. Her hands folded neatly over the polished wood counter while the young banker across from her asked twice if she was sure she wanted to withdraw that much from her retirement account. Eleanor had smiled and said yes, because when your only daughter called you in tears saying the house she dreamed about for years would slip away without help, what mother would say no? Rebecca had shown up at Eleanor's doorstep 3 nights before with mascara smudged under her eyes, clutching printed mortgage estimates and photographs of a white colonial home in a quiet Ohio suburb with black shutters, a wraparound porch, and the kind of maple tree in the front yard that looked beautiful in fall. She had sat at Eleanor's kitchen table where she'd done homework as a little girl and whispered, "Mom, this is the one. This is where I want to raise your grandbabies one day. We're so close, but Jason and I are still short on the down payment. If we lose this house, I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself." Eleanor remembered looking at those photos and feeling her heart soften in the way it always had when Rebecca wanted something. She remembered all the years she had spent trying to give her daughter a better life than she herself had known, working double shifts when Rebecca was young, skipping vacations, wearing coats until the sleeves frayed, quietly putting her own dreams aside so her daughters could come first. So when Rebecca reached across the table, tears trembling in her eyes, and said, "You'd be helping build our future. Mom, we'll never forget this," Eleanor believed her. She liquidated a certificate of deposit she promised herself she would keep untouched for emergencies. She ignored the knot in her stomach when the banker gently reminded her that retirement savings were not easy to rebuild at 68. She handed over the cashier's check at the closing office while Rebecca threw her arms around her and cried loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear, "My mother made this possible." For one shining afternoon, Eleanor felt needed, honored, loved. She imagined Sunday dinners in that beautiful kitchen, Christmas mornings with grandchildren racing down polished hardwood stairs, a rocking chair on the porch where she and Rebecca would drink coffee and laugh the way they used to before adulthood made everything complicated. But dreams have a way of revealing themselves for what they are once the papers are signed. The first week after the move, Rebecca answered every call with distracted cheerfulness, always too busy unpacking to talk long. The second week, her texts became shorter. By the third, Eleanor noticed her invitations were met with excuses: contractors in the house, errands to run, Jason tired from work. Then one Saturday evening, while reheating leftover soup in her quiet kitchen, Eleanor opened Facebook and saw the photos. Rebecca standing in her dream home, smiling with a glass of champagne. Jason beside her. Their friends gathered around the granite island in the kitchen Eleanor had paid for. The caption read, "Finally homeowners. We did this all on our own. And I couldn't be prouder of us." Eleanor stared at the screen until the soup boiled over on the stove. Her reflection in the dark kitchen window looked older than it had that morning. She read the caption again, then again. Not one mention of her. Not one word about the sacrifice that had cost nearly half her savings. Her thumb hovered over the screen while something cold and unfamiliar settled into her chest. Because for the first time in her life, Eleanor Whitmore began to wonder if her daughter had ever truly asked for help, or if she had simply learned that her mother would always give it. The next morning, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table long after the coffee in her mug had gone cold, staring at the bright screen of her phone as Rebecca's smiling face beamed back at her from those photographs. She told herself not to be dramatic, not to let one careless caption outweigh a lifetime of motherhood. Perhaps Rebecca had simply forgotten in the excitement. Perhaps young people did not think about such things the way her generation had. She repeated those excuses to herself all week, trying to smooth over the sting with reason, but the hurt stayed lodged beneath her ribs like something sharp. On Wednesday afternoon she decided to do what she had always done whenever there was distance between them. She reached out first. She baked Rebecca's favorite apple cinnamon muffins, wrapped them carefully in a dish towel, and drove 30 minutes across town to the new house without calling ahead, hoping a surprise visit might restore some of the warmth she had imagined when she wrote that check. The neighborhood was even prettier than she remembered, with trimmed hedges, wide sidewalks, and children riding bicycles in neat little circles under the late summer sun. Eleanor smiled despite herself as she walked up the stone path carrying the warm muffins in both hands. Before she could ring the bell, the front door opened. Rebecca stepped outside and immediately froze. Her smile appeared half a second too late. "Mom, what are you doing here?" The words were polite, but the tone carried no joy. Eleanor lifted the dish towels slightly. "I thought I would bring you something fresh from the oven. I was nearby and figured I would stop in." Rebecca glanced over her shoulder before stepping into the doorway so her body blocked the entrance. "Oh, we actually are kind of in the middle of something." Eleanor blinked. Behind her daughter, she heard laughter, male voices, music playing softly. "You have company?" she asked. "Just Jason's coworkers," Rebecca said quickly. "It is really not a good time." For a moment Eleanor simply stood there, the warm dish in her hand suddenly feeling much heavier than it had in the car. "I could just drop these off," she offered quietly. Rebecca gave a strained smile. "Actually, the kitchen is a mess. We are trying to keep tonight more professional." "That makes sense." Professional. Eleanor looked past her daughter's shoulder and caught sight of polished glasses lined neatly on the kitchen island she had helped pay for.
Charcuterie bord arrange de bénéate pendant light.
And a room full of guests laughing inside the home she had sacrificed for. "Of course," she said, because dignity had always come easier to her than confrontation. Rebecca leaned down, kissed the air beside her cheek, and took the muffins without inviting her in. The door shut gently but firmly in Eleanor's face. She made it all the way back to her car before her hands began to shake. That night she sat in her recliner replaying the moment again and again, hearing the careful politeness in Rebecca's voice, the way strangers had been welcomed into the house while her own mother remained on the porch like an unwanted solicitor. Still, part of her clung to denial, until 3 days later, when her friend Denise called after attending church brunch with one of Rebecca's new neighbors. "I ran into someone from your daughter's subdivision," Denise said casually. She said Rebecca has been telling everyone she and Jason bought that place without help, said they worked hard and did it all on their own. "You must be proud." Eleanor felt something inside her go still. She thanked Denise, ended the call, and sat motionless in the quiet of her living room. Then she rose slowly, walked to the hallway closet, and opened the metal lockbox where she kept old financial papers. There, beneath insurance forms and pension statements, was the withdrawal slip from the bank and a copy of the cashier's check for $47,000. She stared at the paper for a long time, then placed it gently on the dining table in front of her. For the first time, she no longer saw the transaction as generosity. She saw it for what it might truly have been, the price her daughter had assigned to her mother's love. For 3 days, Eleanor did not call her daughter. She did not text. She did not send another tray of baked goods or invent another excuse to maintain a relationship that now felt painfully one-sided. Instead, she watched. She paid attention in the quiet way women of her generation often did when their hearts were breaking but they refused to let anyone see it. Rebecca, however, seemed not to notice the silence at all. Her social media remained full of cheerful updates from the new house, new patio furniture, custom curtains, expensive light fixtures, and weekend dinners at restaurants Eleanor knew were not cheap. Every smiling photograph felt like another small betrayal. Not because Rebecca was happy, but because Eleanor remembered exactly how desperate her daughter had claimed to be. She remembered trembling hands, tearful eyes, whispered fears that the house would slip away if they could not scrape together every last dollar. Yet now Rebecca and Jason appeared to be living not like a young couple stretched thin by a mortgage, but like people with plenty of money to spare. The thought stayed with Eleanor until the following Friday, when chance gave her what she could no longer ignore. She had stopped at the grocery store after her doctor's appointment and was comparing cartons of eggs when she heard a familiar voice in the next aisle. Rebecca. Instinctively, Eleanor froze. Her daughter was speaking to someone in the bright, animated tone she used when trying to impress. Jason said if we had used our savings for the down payment, it would have wiped out our Italy trip next spring. Rebecca laughed. Thank God my mother came through when she did. Honestly, it worked out perfectly. Eleanor stood motionless behind the shelf of cereal boxes, every muscle in her body going still. Another woman laughed softly. That was smart of you. If someone is willing to offer free money, why not take it? Rebecca's answer came without hesitation, light and careless and devastating. Exactly. My mother loves feeling needed. She practically insisted. Eleanor did not remember leaving the store. She only remembered sitting in her car afterward with the engine off, hands clenched so tightly around the steering wheel that her knuckles turned white. The parking lot blurred in front of her as those words replayed in her mind. My mother loves feeling needed. She practically insisted. As though the sacrifice had been vanity. As though $47,000 had not represented years of discipline, years of skipped luxuries, years of telling herself there would be time later for the things she wanted. She drove home in silence and walked through the front door of the small brick ranch where she had lived alone since her husband passed. The house felt especially quiet that afternoon. She sat at the dining table and opened the folder where she had kept her retirement statements. She studied the numbers carefully, then reached for her calculator. The withdrawal had not merely been generous. It had delayed her retirement plans by years. It had forced her to postpone replacing her aging furnace before winter. It had changed the way she would live the rest of her life. And Rebecca had known. Worse than that, Rebecca had planned for it. The tears, the trembling voice, the desperate plea at the kitchen table. It had all been theater. Eleanor sat very still for a long time, the late afternoon sunlight creeping slowly across the hardwood floor. Then she folded the financial papers into a neat stack, slid them back into the folder, and placed it carefully beside her. Her face did not crumple. She did not cry. By the time the sun disappeared beyond the backyard fence, the grief had hardened into something colder, quieter, and far more dangerous than hurt. For the first time since writing that check, Eleanor Whitmore stopped asking herself how her daughter could do this to her. Instead, she began asking a different question entirely. What, exactly, did Rebecca think would happen now that her mother knew the truth? Rebecca called the following Sunday as if nothing had happened. Her voice floated through the phone bright and casual, asking whether Eleanor wanted to come by next weekend for brunch because Jason was planning to grill, and they had finally finished decorating the backyard. 6 months earlier, Eleanor would have accepted immediately. She would have brought dessert, complimented every improvement, and pretended not to notice how often her daughter treated affection like a switch she could flip on only when convenient. But now Eleanor heard something she had missed for years beneath Rebecca's sweetness. Expectation. The quiet certainty that her mother would always show up, always forgive, always remain available no matter how little she received in return. Eleanor smiled to herself though her voice stayed warm. I am afraid I cannot this weekend. Sweetheart, I have plans. There was a pause. Plans? Rebecca asked, sounding almost confused by the concept. Yes, Eleanor said simply. A few things I have been putting off. It was a small sentence, but saying it felt strangely powerful. Over the next several weeks, Eleanor began making changes so subtle at first that no one noticed. She stopped offering help before being asked. She stopped sending surprise gifts for no reason. She stopped dropping off groceries when Rebecca complained about being busy. When her daughter texted asking if she could watch Jason's sister's dog while they attended a concert, Eleanor replied that she was unavailable. When Rebecca hinted that the guest room still needed furniture and joked that perhaps Mom might want to contribute, just a little more since she had already started the project, Eleanor responded with a polite laugh and changed the subject. For the first time in her adult life, Rebecca was being forced to exist without automatic access to her mother's resources. The shift unsettled her immediately. "Are you upset with me about something?" Rebecca asked during their next phone call, her tone sharpened by suspicion. "You have been acting strange lately." Eleanor stirred cream into her coffee and kept her voice calm. "Not strange, Rebecca. Just busy." "Busy doing what?" The question came too quickly, too possessively, and Eleanor almost smiled at how revealing it was. She understood now that Rebecca had never simply expected love. She had expected access. Access to time, to labor, to money, to emotional support delivered on demand. "Taking care of my own life for a change," Eleanor answered. The silence on the other end stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Then Rebecca gave a short laugh that sounded forced. "Well, good for you, I guess." But Eleanor knew her daughter well enough to hear the irritation underneath. That evening she sat in the office of Martin Holloway, the estate attorney who had handled her late husband's affairs years before. Martin listened quietly while Eleanor explained everything, his expression growing more solemn with every detail. When she finished, he folded his hands over the desk. "What would you like to do?" Eleanor looked at the framed family photograph she still kept in her purse, the one taken 10 years earlier when Rebecca had leaned into her shoulder smiling as if love between them had never required terms and conditions. "I would like to make sure my daughter never mistakes generosity for weakness again," she said. Martin nodded slowly. Together they reviewed every page of Eleanor's estate plan. The house, the retirement accounts, the life insurance policies, the savings bonds she had quietly purchased for years with the intention of leaving Rebecca a comfortable inheritance one day. Eleanor did not remove her daughter entirely. Not yet. But she changed enough that, for the first time, Rebecca's future would no longer be built on the assumption that her mother's assets naturally belonged to her. When Eleanor left the office, the autumn air felt cooler than expected, crisp against her skin. She stood beside her car for a moment and breathed deeply. For months she had felt humiliated, used, foolish. But now something steadier settled over her. Rebecca might still believe she had one. She might still believe her mother had accepted the role assigned to her. Aging benefactor, useful only when needed. But Eleanor had learned something her daughter clearly had not. The most dangerous mistake a person can make is assuming kindness means someone will never stop giving. Rebecca lasted 11 days before asking for money again. The text arrived just after breakfast on a gray Tuesday morning, cheerful in tone and shameless in substance. "Hey Mom. Random question. Do you think you could help us out with $15,000 for the patio renovation? We found a contractor giving us a great deal, but only if we book this week." Eleanor stared at the screen while steam rose from her untouched tea.
$15,000.
Not for an emergency. Not for medical bills. Not because they were in danger of losing the house she had already helped them buy. For a patio. For decorative stone and outdoor furniture, and whatever else young couples with too much entitlement and too little shame apparently considered urgent. She set the phone down and let it sit unanswered for an hour before replying with 4 simple words. "That will not be possible." Rebecca responded almost immediately. "Seriously?" Then another text. "Mom, what is going on with you lately?" Then another. "You know we are trying to build something nice here." Eleanor read every message and answered none of them. By evening, Rebecca was at her front door. She swept into the house without waiting to be invited, expensive handbag over one shoulder, irritation radiating off her like heat. "What is your problem?" she demanded before Eleanor had even closed the door. "You have been cold for weeks. And now suddenly you cannot help with anything? After everything I have done to include you in our lives?" Eleanor looked at her daughter for a long moment, almost marveling at the audacity of that sentence. Then she gestured toward the dining table. "Sit down, Rebecca." Something in her tone must have registered, because Rebecca hesitated before taking the chair opposite her. Eleanor walked to the sideboard, retrieved the folder she had prepared, and placed it gently on the table between them. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. Rebecca frowned. "No." "That," Eleanor said, tapping the papers, "is every financial statement connected to the money I gave you." Rebecca's face changed instantly. Not guilt, not remorse. Calculation. "Mom, why are you making this weird?" Eleanor's voice remained calm, almost painfully so. "Because I heard you in the grocery store." Rebecca froze. The silence that followed seemed to press against the walls. "I heard what you said about me. About using my money so you could keep your vacation plans. About how I love feeling needed. About how it worked out perfectly." Rebecca's mouth opened, then closed. Her cheeks flushed pink. "You were eavesdropping?" she snapped. As if that were the offense worth discussing. Eleanor gave a small, humorless smile. "Interesting that is your concern. You are twisting what I meant," Rebecca said quickly. "Jason and I were under stress. I was venting. People say things. Do people also tell their neighbors they bought a house entirely on their own?" Eleanor asked. "Do they tell their friends their mother practically forced money on them?" Rebecca's expression hardened. The shame vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "You offered that money," she said flatly. "No one held a gun to your head." Eleanor did not flinch. "No. I offered help because I believed my daughter was in need. That was my mistake." Rebecca leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "So what? Now you want some kind of medal for helping your child? Parents support their kids. Mom, that is what family does." Eleanor stared at the woman across from her, and felt the last of her denial finally die. There it was. Not apology. Not regret. Just entitlement dressed up as moral righteousness. "Family does not manipulate one another," Eleanor said quietly. "Family does not lie to get access to someone's savings." Rebecca stood abruptly, chair scraping against the hardwood. "You are being dramatic. It was just money." Eleanor rose slowly to her feet. Her voice, when she answered, was soft enough to force Rebecca to listen. "No, Rebecca, it was never just money. It was trust. And you spent that far more carelessly than the $47,000. Rebecca stared at her, breathing hard, but for once had nothing clever left to say. She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. At the threshold she turned, eyes blazing. "Do not expect me to beg for forgiveness over this." Eleanor met her gaze without blinking. "I do not," she said. "But one day, you will understand exactly what this cost you." Rebecca kept her promise for nearly a month. She did not call. She did not text. She did not apologize. The silence between mother and daughter settled over Eleanor's life like fresh snow, cold, quiet, strangely peaceful once the initial sting passed. For the first time in years, Eleanor's days belonged entirely to her. She joined a watercolor class at the community center she had always claimed she was too busy to attend. She met Denise for lunch twice in 1 week without feeling guilty for not keeping herself available in case Rebecca needed something. She replaced the furnace she had postponed repairing, then bought herself a new coat without standing in the store wondering whether the money would be better saved for someone else. Little by little, Eleanor began rebuilding the life she had neglected while pouring so much of herself into a daughter who treated her generosity as obligation. Then December arrived, and with it, the first crack in Rebecca's pride. The phone rang on a Tuesday evening while Eleanor was wrapping gifts for the church toy drive. She let it ring twice before answering. Rebecca's voice was tight, too sweet, the way it always became when she wanted something she was not entitled to ask for. Mom, I was thinking maybe we could put all that unpleasantness behind us before Christmas. Eleanor folded a strip of tape carefully against the wrapping paper before replying. That depends on whether anything has changed. Silence. Then a sigh. Do we really have to keep doing this? Rebecca asked. Jason got laid off last week. We are under a lot of stress. We could use family right now. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. There it was again. Not remorse. Need. I am sorry to hear that, she said evenly. I hope he finds something soon. Rebecca waited. When Eleanor said nothing more, her voice sharpened. That is it? What else were you expecting? Another pause. Then, quieter now. We are falling behind. Mom. Eleanor leaned back in her chair. Rebecca, are you asking me for money again? It would only be temporary. Rebecca rushed to say. Just until Jason finds something. We are talking maybe 8 or 10,000. We would pay you back this time. Eleanor almost laughed at the phrase this time, as though history had not already taught them both how empty such promises were. No, she said. Rebecca inhaled sharply. Unbelievable. No. Eleanor repeated, calm and clear. I am not your emergency fund. I am not your retirement plan. I am not here to subsidize the lifestyle you chose to build. Rebecca's voice rose immediately. You would really let your own daughter struggle over a grudge? Eleanor set down the tape dispenser and spoke with measured precision. You are not struggling because of bad luck. Rebecca, you are struggling because you built a life based on the assumption that someone else would always cover what you could not. The line went silent. Then came the tears. Sudden, trembling, strategic. I cannot believe how cruel you have become. Eleanor listened to the sound and felt nothing except a distant sadness for the years she had once mistaken tears for sincerity. No, she said softly. I have simply become difficult to manipulate. Rebecca hung up without another word. 2 days later, Eleanor learned from Denise that Rebecca had spent the afternoon complaining to relatives that her mother was hoarding money, while her own daughter suffered. Apparently the story omitted the $47,000. Apparently it also omitted the patio contractor, the European vacation, and the luxury furniture delivered to the dream home only months before. Eleanor did not defend herself. She did not call family members to correct the record. She had reached an age where she no longer felt compelled to explain the truth to people determined to misunderstand it. Instead, she called Martin Holloway's office and scheduled one final appointment. If Rebecca wished to tell the world her mother was selfish, Eleanor decided she might as well make sure her daughter learned what selfishness looked like when generosity was gone for good. Martin Holloway's office smelled faintly of leather and old paper, exactly as Eleanor remembered. The attorney adjusted his glasses and reviewed the revised documents one final time before sliding them across the polished desk. Once you sign these, he said, the bulk of your estate will transfer to the Whitmore Family Education Trust. Your daughter will receive a modest personal sum, but she will have no control over the trust, no access to the principal, and no expectation of additional inheritance beyond what is outlined here. Eleanor read every page slowly, not because she doubted her decision, but because she wanted to feel the weight of it fully. For nearly 40 years she had imagined everything she built would one day pass naturally to Rebecca. The house, the investments, the insurance policies, the savings accumulated through decades of discipline. Mothers are taught to think of sacrifice as instinct, as destiny. But sitting there in that office, pen poised over the signature line, Eleanor understood something she wished she had learned sooner. Love does not require financing another person's entitlement. She signed every page with steady hands. Martin gathered the papers neatly. Would you like your daughter notified now or later? Eleanor considered the question for only a moment. Later, she said. I prefer consequences to arrive when people least expect them. Christmas came and went without Rebecca attending church with her. Without a visit. Without even a proper card. A generic text arrived at noon on Christmas Day. Hope you have a nice holiday. And Eleanor stared at it for several seconds before setting her phone face down beside her plate. She ate dinner with Denise and her husband instead, laughing more than she had during any holiday in recent memory. By February, word reached Eleanor through relatives that Rebecca and Jason had quietly put the house on the market. Apparently Jason's unemployment had lasted longer than expected. Apparently the mortgage, the car payments, the credit card debt, and the polished lifestyle they had fought so hard to maintain had begun collapsing under their own weight. Eleanor felt no triumph hearing it, only clarity. A person could spend years mistaking appearances for stability. Then one day the bill came due. The call arrived on a rainy Thursday evening. Rebecca's voice sounded thinner than Eleanor remembered, stripped of its usual confidence. Mom, she began softly. We need to talk. Eleanor sat in her armchair with a book open in her lap. About what? About everything. Rebecca hesitated. I know things have been bad between us, but Jason and I are in a really difficult position. We may lose the house if we cannot sell fast enough. And with the market slowing down. Eleanor said nothing. Rebecca continued, voice cracking now. Whether from stress or strategy Eleanor could no longer tell. I know I made mistakes. I know I said things I should not have. But you are my mother. I need you right now. Eleanor closed the book gently and set it aside. No, she said. The word landed like stone. Rebecca inhaled sharply. Mom, please, no. Eleanor repeated. I will not refinance your mistakes. I will not rescue you from consequences you created while insulting the person who helped build the life you took for granted. So that is it? Rebecca snapped, the desperation already curdling into anger. You are just done with me because of one misunderstanding? Eleanor stood and walked to the window, looking out at rain streaking across the dark glass. This was never about one misunderstanding, she said quietly. It was about discovering that my daughter saw my love as an account balance. Silence answered her. Then Rebecca's voice came smaller. You are punishing me forever over money. Eleanor's reflection stared back at her in the glass, older, steadier, harder than before. No, Rebecca, she said. I am teaching you that not everything lost can be bought back. She ended the call before her daughter could answer. Then she stood there for a long while in the quiet house, listening to the rain. Knowing somewhere across town Rebecca was finally beginning to understand that some doors do not slam shut all at once. Sometimes they close slowly, one disappointment at a time, until the person on the other side suddenly realizes they no longer have a way back in. 3 weeks later, the house sold for less than Rebecca and Jason had hoped. The market had shifted. Buyers had leverage. And the polished dream home that once filled Rebecca's social media feed with staged perfection no longer looked like victory. Eleanor heard the news through family before Rebecca said a word. Apparently they had taken a loss after fees, repairs, and outstanding debt. Apparently they were moving into a smaller rental townhome across town. Apparently things were temporary, though everyone knew temporary was the word people use when pride would not let them call something what it really was. Eleanor expected anger from Rebecca after the sale. Blame. Silence. Instead, what arrived one Saturday morning was a bouquet of white roses on her porch with a handwritten card tucked inside. I miss you. Can we please start over? Love, Rebecca. Eleanor stood in her doorway holding the flowers, studying the careful loops of her daughter's handwriting. The gesture would have undone her immediately. She would have rushed to believe hardship had humbled her child and pain had restored perspective. But pain does not always create character. Sometimes it simply reveals it. She set the flowers in water and waited. 2 days later, Rebecca called asking to meet for lunch. They sat across from each other in a quiet cafe downtown, sunlight falling across the table between them. Rebecca looked tired, older somehow. Her designer clothes had given way to something simpler. And for a fleeting moment Eleanor saw not the manipulative woman who had used her, but the little girl who once scraped her knee on the driveway and cried into her mother's apron. It hurt more than she expected. I have had a lot of time to think, Rebecca began softly, about how things got so bad between us. Eleanor said nothing. She had learned silence often invited more truth than questions. Rebecca folded and unfolded her napkin. I know I was selfish, she said. I know I took you for granted. I should not have said the things I said. Eleanor studied her daughter's face. Why now? She asked quietly. Rebecca blinked. What? Why now? Rebecca? Why after the house sold? Why after your finances collapsed? Why after I stopped being useful? The color drained from Rebecca's cheeks. That is not fair. Eleanor's expression did not change. Is it not? Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes. Real this time. Perhaps. Or perhaps not. Eleanor no longer cared enough to distinguish between the two. I made mistakes, Rebecca whispered. But I am trying. Eleanor nodded slowly. Good. Then let those mistakes teach you something. Rebecca reached across the table, desperation breaking through her composure. Mom, please. I know I do not deserve it, but I need to know things can be fixed between us. Eleanor looked at her daughter's outstretched hand and remembered another hand years ago, small and sticky from melted popsicles, reaching for hers in a grocery store parking lot, trusting without question that her mother would always guide her safely home. The memory nearly broke her. But grief and wisdom often live in the same place. Eleanor pulled her hands back into her lap. Some things can be repaired, she said softly. Trust is not one of them once someone proves they only value it when they are losing something. Rebecca's face crumpled. So that is it? You are never going to forgive me? Eleanor's voice remained gentle, but firm enough to leave no room for fantasy. Forgiveness and access are not the same thing. I have made peace with what happened, but peace does not require me to pretend you did not show me exactly who you are. Rebecca cried openly then, quiet tears slipping down her cheeks in the middle of the cafe while strangers politely looked away. Eleanor stood, placed enough cash on the table to cover both lunches, and reached for her coat. Before leaving, she rested one hand lightly against the back of Rebecca's chair, and said the words her daughter would remember for the rest of her life. You did not lose me because I stopped loving you. You lost me because you kept treating my love like something you could spend. Then she walked away without looking back. Spring arrived quietly that year, bringing with it the kind of warm afternoons Eleanor used to spend waiting for phone calls that no longer mattered. Her life had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The silence in her house no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. She painted twice a week now, her kitchen table often covered in brushes and watercolor paper, instead of unpaid emotional debts. She volunteered at the library on Thursdays, took long walks through the neighborhood in the evenings, and began saying yes to invitations she once declined because she had always kept herself available in case Rebecca needed something. It turned out freedom looked a lot like ordinary happiness when one stopped sacrificing it for people who never noticed the cost. Rebecca called less after the lunch at the cafe. When she did, her voice was more careful, more restrained, as though she had finally learned that a relationship could not survive on guilt once respect was gone. They spoke on birthdays, on holidays, sometimes about the weather, sometimes about mutual relatives, never again about money. The warmth between them never returned to what it once had been. But Eleanor stopped mourning that. She had come to understand that she had not lost the daughter she thought she had. She had lost the illusion of her. Nearly a year after the day she wrote that check, Martin Holloway called to confirm the final details of the trust transfer. There was one last document requiring her signature. Eleanor drove to his office beneath a bright blue sky and signed without hesitation. As she handed back the pen, Martin smiled gently. "You seem lighter than the last time you were here." Eleanor smiled in return. "That is because I finally learned the difference between loving someone and enabling them." That evening she returned home, poured herself a glass of iced tea, and sat on the back porch watching the sun sink low behind the trees. Her phone buzzed beside her. A text from Rebecca. Just 3 words. "Hope you are well." Eleanor stared at the message for a moment before typing back. "I am." She set the phone down and let the silence return. No bitterness remained in her. No desire for revenge. No fantasy that her daughter would someday transform into the person Eleanor once believed she was. There was only acceptance. Clear and calm and long overdue. She had spent too many years confusing sacrifice with love, generosity with duty, motherhood with endless surrender. She knew better now. Some people will take from you for as long as you keep offering, then call it love because that sounds kinder than what it truly is. But love without gratitude becomes entitlement. Kindness without boundaries becomes exploitation. And money given to someone who does not respect your heart will never buy closeness, only convenience. Rebecca had wanted a dream home. She got one, for a little while. But in the process, she lost something far more valuable than a house, an inheritance, or even $47,000. She lost the unquestioning devotion of the one person who had loved her enough to give without asking for anything in return. Eleanor leaned back in her chair as evening shadows stretched across the yard, and for the first time in many years, she felt no urge to fix what someone else had broken. Some lessons, she had learned, only arrive after loss. And some daughters do not understand the value of a mother until they discover that her love was never something guaranteed. It was a gift, one they should have treated with more care.